Hello and welcome to the Life of Learning podcast. I'm Eustace Frank, and this podcast is all about exploring how human beings learn and I guess how I see that in my own life and in the lives of others, and what that kind of means for larger purpose and direction that we could be taking our lives. So it's been maybe about for a half a year or so, I've been watching some of the videos of a man called Anthony Magnabosco, and he does what's very interesting. He does what he calls street epistemology. So he goes out and talks to people and has conversations about beliefs that people have. In particular, the questions are about what people obviously believe, why they believe it, and then how did they determine that what they believe is actually true. And that's what epistemology is all about. It's the study of knowledge. And exactly, so how did you come to have this knowledge? And there's some absolutely amazing conversations that he has with people in regards to this. He just does sort of street interviews, hence the name. And I'm going to link also two really great examples of this, where he talks to a girl called Maritza, and the conversations that they have about knowing true things, and then also about specific instances where she makes claims regarding the supernatural. They're all really interesting, and they're a fantastic example of how a conversation regarding these topics can actually go, and I find that really valuable. But this whole idea of street epistemology actually kind of originated from a guy called Peter Boghossian, and because I enjoyed Anthony Magnabosco's stuff so much, I decided to look into the book that Peter Boghossian had written, and it is called A Manual for Creating Atheists. And that title, exactly, it took me a long time to actually decide to read the book, because that title is, well, it's an awful title, really, to be honest. And exactly, most of the reviews, a lot of the reviews on this book were like, what's up with the title? Like, that's an awful title. And the title alone just about put me off from even reading this book. And so I found this kind of a fascinating book, in the sense that on the one hand, Peter Boghossian does advocate and promote people to have open and honest dialogue, and to not be so certain and dogmatic in their views, and to really be open to listening to the other person and understanding the other person. But then on the flip side of that, he's very adamant that, he wants to create atheists as such, and he wants to disabuse people of faith. And I found this very curious, and it's kind of one of these things that I've talked about before, about the hypocrisy that's often within us, and this was a very blatant form of that. He's so passionate about this thing, and to the extent of being religiously fervent about trying to create atheists and turn people into atheists. He goes out of his way to try and find people to turn them into atheists, so to speak. Throughout the book, Peter Boghossian often states that he has helped many people leave their faith. But in all the specific examples that he gives throughout the book, the examples that he gives of the conversations that he's had with people, we don't actually ever see a conversation that ended up with someone actually leaving their faith. So it becomes kind of hard to believe him on that. So when it comes to the book, Peter Boghossian does make some excellent points. I definitely think there is value in this book, in terms of especially his criticisms of faith and the way that people use faith as an epistemology, i.e. they use faith to as a reason for saying that something is true that they believe. I, for myself, don't see faith as being anything useful. And then he also points out the differences between faith, trust, and hope, and how people attempt to often conflate these words in an attempt to try and justify some of their beliefs. So there's definitely a lot of value in what he's saying, and the way that he generally seems to go about a lot of his conversations, in terms of that he does, come across as being somewhat open. But at the same time, as you read further into the book, that openness seems to be just really a bit of a front. The problem is that we still hold this belief that we need to make people into something else. Exactly as I talked about yesterday, that we need to manage people into something. And again, this is our whole view of education, for instance, is that we think that we need to make people learn, instead of realizing the fact that human beings learn regardless of whether you make them learn or not. What you want them to learn, yes, we have things that we have values within our life that we would like other people to also accept, partially also because we don't want to feel crazy, and we want to realize that the things that we accept and the things that we believe, that other people share them as well, so that we're not off on our own. Just because we want other people to believe the same things that we believe, in order to, I guess, justify that a bit more, and also to create a sense of community shared by mutual values and those sorts of things, we make the mistake when we feel that we need to force that, when we need to make that happen, instead of being open to the fact that yes, we want to all become to similar types of values so that we can form a more cohesive community, but we actually need to be open to our views also being corrected by other people. What I'm noticing more and more is that there's a difference between one-on-one conversations, where we can really dig into something deeply, and you get feedback, immediate feedback, based on what you are saying from the other person. Now, this situation that I'm in here now, where I am just talking and you have no direct chance to necessarily jump in and stop me on a certain point and just give me that immediate feedback as I'm talking. This is a quite different situation, and not only that, but it becomes an even more different situation when I decide to implement certain programs and certain laws to then silence any sort of feedback from you at all. And unfortunately, this is what so commonly happens in so many ideas that people have, and ideologies and religions, and this idea that we are very open when we're personal with other people, but when it comes to larger society, all of a sudden we aren't really that open anymore. For instance, when Islam is a very small segment of the population, they tend to they tend to be quite open and assimilate and all those sorts of things. But things change quite rapidly once Islam starts to feel like they're kind of in more of the majority, and then it's all of a sudden it's calls for Sharia law and all those sorts of things. Same with, Christianity in the past as well. When Christianity was in a minority, they were quite open, but when it became the majority opinion and all those, then that's when, Christianity in the past hasn't been that open to other people, and has done things to force certain beliefs, try and force people to believe certain things, and again, make people something. And unfortunately, this book develops that mindset once again, and we just see it happening all over again. As people become more atheistic, and as that kind of continues to grow, Peter Boghossian kind of shows what eventually kind of happens, because he openly states that, that we should be putting down faith. He talks about the adults table and the kids table, so he's looking forward to a day where faith is so rubbished that that if anybody brings up faith as an epistemology, that immediately you can just say to that person, "Oh, you're not very grown up. You go play at the little kids table until you can learn to actually use reason and evidence like us big kids." And of course, that sort of attitude is, it's kind of a faith position, because faith basically says that I don't need to justify using reason why I hold my belief. I'm just going to push down what you're going to say. And again, that's what he's advocating, is to get to the point where you don't need to use reason with people who advocate faith, but rather you just send them away and don't listen to what they have to say. He also goes into calling faith basically like a virus that should be part of the disease database, and that if anyone shows a sign of using faith, that immediately that we go in there and eradicate it, like we try to eradicate polio or whatever. So, and this kind of thinking is, it's kind of scary. It's authoritarian, and it is basically just using manipulative indoctrination tactics instead of reason. And so on the one hand, he advocates using reason and openness and dialogue, and on the other hand, once he feels that atheism has got the upper hand, he's hoping that we can use basically indoctrination and force and coercion to squash any remnant of faith that is left. And this type of thinking is so prevalent in so many ways that humans think about how other people learn. And this is why I come back to this topic of learning, and this of course my interest is that we can't make people learn, and any attempt to make people learn is just going to turn you into an authoritarian dictator of sorts. And this gets to some of the strangeness that Peter Boghossian brings about in this book. Is there's he's really grasped onto some excellent ideas. For instance, when he talks about children initially and within families, he talks about the fact that we actually need to model the values of openness, model the values of being uncertain, that it's okay to say I don't know, and he says modeling is the best way. So on the one sense he says that, and then a wee bit later in the book, he's full on wanting people to engage in bringing about legislation and other tools, basically, to implement major societal change, and that this is basically in which he seeks to basically indoctrinate children into the right way of thinking, and to basically beat out of any remaining dissenters in any notion of faith. And that, I applaud him on how he talks about the family, in terms of, yes, we do need to model actual values, and that is more likely, once we start modeling the values that we have, then other people are more likely to take them up, those people around us. But then on the other hand, he still has this tendency to want to use force and coercion and indoctrination to try to get other people to accept the same values that he has. And this is always this mixture that human beings like to have, is, on the one sense, we see the value of modeling and openness, but we just can't seem to help ourselves, and we feel that we just need to get in there and manage these people into the right way of thinking or the right way of doing things. And so this is what I find so fascinating about this, and why I enjoy talking about this, because we eventually realize we can't mix freedom and coercion, as much as we like to try, and we think that it's somehow in some other universe it is somehow magically going to that we can harmonize freedom and coercion. The thing is that we can't. They are opposites. And so yeah, I find this idea very fascinating. Now, I just wanted to make a final point here before my Christian friends get too excited about, I guess, the hypocrisy of Peter Boghossian. This, of course, just because Peter Boghossian does show hypocrisy regarding this, doesn't mean exactly that there's no value in street epistemology. I think it's actually an excellent way of engaging with people, asking those questions. What do you believe? Why do you believe it? And how did you determine that that was true? I think that's an excellent starting place for all sorts of conversations. But it does mean that the criticism that I have and what I've shared in this video and in this podcast doesn't mean that Peter Boghossian is human. Just because these criticisms exist doesn't mean that faith is valid, doesn't mean that the concept of God is valid either, but it just means that Peter Boghossian is human, and for me, I'm more interested in understanding how humans function, and what I'm saying here. The other final point that I wanted to make is the fact that, yes, it seems Peter Boghossian has this view that that you can basically reason people into changing their beliefs, and I'm more and more am of the idea that this is not actually possible. That's not how we function as human beings. That again, I think it nearly requires to believe in this kind of magic, where if you say the right words, that basically people are going to change their mind and come to the same opinion, and value the same things that you do. And that's just not the case, as human beings don't work that way. I think words are really helpful in terms of providing further explanation, to delve into the hows, and some of the whys of what we believe and why we believe it and all those sorts of things. But a lot of the initial impetus that we have to believe something comes from observing the world around us. It comes from observing other people and seeing what is of value, and looking at what is modeled rather than what is said. So yeah, I'm not of the opinion that if you've got the rock solid arguments that therefore that people are going to change their minds. That's just not the case. Human beings don't work like that. We work by observing the world around us and seeing and modeling what we value from what we see other people doing. So I think I've covered most of what I've wanted to say. I've tried a little bit something different this time round. Basically, I just recorded myself saying these thoughts. I went for a run this morning and this was going through my head, and then I came back and just recorded myself saying these sorts of things without writing anything down as such, and I was just trying to free flow it as such. So I'm not sure if it worked or it didn't work. Maybe my thoughts were a bit jumbled, and so I might end up writing an article about this to try and maybe put it into a more structured way, and maybe it's easier to understand. But hopefully you did get something out of this and you were able to follow along for the most part. So thanks so much if you got to this point, and thanks so much for listening, and I hope that you continue to enjoy these podcasts. So thank you very much. All right, we'll see you again.